Hi, this is Alexa Griffith, and this is my final Genius Hour project, Cloning Experiments Google Slides. I did my Genius Hour project on cloning, so I wanted to teach you all about cloning. So first of all, you might ask, what is cloning? Cloning is a replica of a fragment of DNA placed in an organism so that there's enough to analyze or use in a protein production. Simpler terms, this means that a fragment of DNA in a living organism is copied and put into another living organism to make an exact copy of the first organism. To start off, you should know that cloning can happen naturally or artificially in a lab. Cloning has already happened to dogs in North Korea. You can get your dog cloned in North Korea for $100,000. They have made an identical dog to the original dog with its DNA. This would be an example of artificial cloning in a lab. Cloning also does not make an exact copy. On the outside it might look the same, but internally it can be different. In the picture shown above, the dogs were cloned in North Korea, and they look pretty much exactly the same, but internally they're different by the way they act. So now you might ask yourself, why should I even care about cloning? You should care about cloning because cloning could be the future for humans in our technology. If you don't educate yourself on what cloning is and what the risks are and outcomes it could possibly have, you will not be able to take your own stance on cloning, resulting in being uneducated about the possible future. Cloning also has lots of ethical issues that I will not be talking about in this presentation, but you need to be educated about cloning so that you can take your own stance, but you also need to know what the next generation could hold. So in these pictures to the right, and the top one, these two mouse, they were copied, they were cloned. This one was cloned to make that one. Here we have a mother sheep, and the scientists took her DNA fragment and they made the exact copy of her. But this is when she was younger and they named it Dolly. This is one of the big first accomplishments in the US. Here is just a bunch of people cloned, or they look like clones because they look exactly the same. And then down here we just have a picture of how scientists do the cloning, like how they zoom into the cells and they insert different DNA or different cells into another thing to make the cloning possible. So, natural cloning experiment. What I did is I did a natural cloning experiment. To demonstrate a process of cloning, I did an experiment that shows natural cloning. This will be an example and will help you gain more knowledge about cloning and how it works. I will explain the process, the pictures, and each step of how the experiment works. In this experiment, I used a cabbage, a knife, a cutting board, a piece of tape, a Sharpie marker, plastic bag, a camera, some water, and a paper towel. To start, I first took a full cabbage and took all of the leaves off carefully until I got down to the root or stem of the cabbage. I took all the leaves off the cabbage which cover the root at the bottom until I got to the root where there were no leaves left. Here on the picture, this is the cabbage core without any of the leaves. So the next step after taking off all the leaves was to take a picture of the stem. From this point forward, I will take a picture every few days to show the growth of my cabbage and show how the cabbage naturally clones its own cells to make another cabbage. Now that the leaves are all off, I will put the cabbage in a wet paper towel. This paper towel will be the same throughout the whole experiment. To add on, the paper towel will be given in the cabbage, will give the cabbage water to grow. Since it's a plant, it needs water. Then I will cover the cabbage with paper towel and put it into a bag labeled stem. The bag will have a little bit of air in it to trap some of the water in there, and I'll put the bag in sunlight to allow the cabbage to grow and start natural cloning. Since the cabbage is still a plant, it needs water, air, and sunlight to grow, so I need to give it these essential things so that the cabbage can grow. Now that the cabbage has everything it needs to start the process of natural cloning, the cabbage will take its own cells, from its stem and reproduced some of its genes to create another copy of itself before it took all the leaves off. This is natural cloning because there is no need for a lab or scientist, and the cabbage does it all by itself. I just give the essential things that the cabbage needs to grow and reproduce. After a few days, we start to see the cabbage growing new leaves. If you look closely, you can see the cabbage has grown a little stem for leaves to grow off, but the buds for the leaves haven't opened yet. This means that the cabbage has started its natural cloning process and will keep using water and its own cells to reproduce and grow bigger. As you can see here in the picture, there are little buds along the root or the core of the cabbage that will soon bud soon, but they haven't budded yet. They've just started developing. Now that we are 3 days later from the last picture, and the cabbage still hasn't grown much, but is showing little improvement. Some of the leaves have started to grow out of their buds, and the natural cloning is still working. As you can see here, some of these buds, they've grown bigger, and that would mean that the leaves in there have grown bigger, so that soon they will bud out and grow big. Now the next picture of our cabbage clearly shows that the leaves forming. They have also gotten a little bit bigger from the last time. The cloning process is still using its cells to grow just like the first cabbage. Soon the leaves will sprout out more and show more deficient cabbage. So here you can see that these used to be the small buds from the first picture, or one of the first pictures, but now they have started to expand and grow out and they're becoming their own leaves. Now we can clearly see that the cabbage is moving on from its early developments of the process of cloning. The cabbage has now developed bigger leaves. From the stage forward, this cabbage should get bigger leaves. So now that they've budded out, you can see that this top leaf is the biggest. This left leaf is just a little bit smaller than the top one, and this bud has grown into 2 different leaves. Now that we are a little over a week into the project and the cabbage is clearly showing growth in the last picture, the cabbage leaves are still getting bigger, especially the top one in this picture. The leaves are also starting to sprout out and look more like a cabbage. As you can see here, the top one, as I just said, is the biggest, but it also is sprouting little leaves around it and off its stem. The left one here is still growing bigger, but it looks a little bit like the last picture, but it's still growing. And this bottom one down here has sprouted into 3 different leaves. It was 1 bud, and then it was into 2, and now it's become 3. Now we are close to the end of the project, and our cabbage experiment is still making lots of progress. The top leaf still shows the most improvement in growth, but the other leaves are still growing a lot. The plant should now grow like a regular plant should, with water, sunlight, and air, and the leaves should just develop bigger. This top one is still the biggest, the little leaves still developing around it. This has sprouted into 2, which is good, instead of 1 like the last picture, and this is growing into 3 leaves now. This is now our second to last picture, and the leaves are still growing. Nothing else over this project will happen besides the leaves growing. In the picture, it shows that more leaves have sprouted up from the cabbage roots. So what I'm saying is that these last final pictures of our project, nothing else big will happen except for the leaves growing. Because it's a plant, the leaves will be growing still bigger. So here's our the top one is our big leaf that's still growing, and the little ones around it are growing even bigger. This leaf that's in the middle from the top and the left once was 1, but now is 2 leaves, and the 3-leafed one over here has grown even bigger. In this last picture, you can see clearly that from this point forward, nothing much will change besides the leaf growth. The cloning process started at the beginning, but now towards the end, the cabbage will naturally grow on its own. The cloning process started at the beginning, but now the plant will grow like a regular plant and just grow leaves and grow bigger. And it will still grow as a clone, but it doesn't need to keep doing that process over and over. It's just growing. So here you can see here's our big leaf, and you can't even tell really which leaves were the ones from the last picture because they've grown so big and they're starting to grow up to be more like a cabbage. It's gotten a lot bigger from the last pictures. So in this experiment, what happened? I have demonstrated a basic form of natural cloning to teach you more about cloning and how it works. We started off with a cabbage root with no leaves, and even though the cabbage didn't grow into another huge cabbage because of the limited time I had, it grew big leaves to show that the natural cloning was working. This showed that the cabbage cells did clone from the ones of the cabbage before, the one we started with, and it did grow. This whole process of natural cloning was done by the cabbage, but I gave it the basic, but it was a basic form of natural cloning, and it was easy to demonstrate cloning to you and teach you about it. I hope you all learned something new about cloning, and I hope you know what our future could be like and what you have to be educated on for the next generation. And I hope you learned, even though this was a basic and simple project, because it was a plant and it was natural, it wasn't in a lab or with scientists, I hope you still learned something about cloning and how this could be in our future with not plants but humans and animals. So, thanks for watching. I hope you all learned something. And this is Alexa Griffith, my Final Genius Hour project on cloning.